What's up guys, how's it going? Hope you're well. Just wanted to share some other healthy advice and other things you can do to take care of your well-being. I focus a lot about what goes on in here and maybe here, so I thought I'd actually get to the physical side of things, how you can take better care of your body. And what better way to start than 3 ways to help improve building muscle in your body. So people can want to build muscle for all sorts of reasons. I'm not going to go into that, but just to sum it up, muscle building is a great way to improve your physique, improve your physical function, like how your strength, your conditioning, how many activities you can do, that kind of thing. And it's also a great way of actually in the long term losing weight. So gaining muscle, you might gain a bit of weight in the short term, but actually what's really good about muscle is it burns more calories than fat. So actually building muscle might really be a good thing to do if you want to lose weight, because it means you'll be able to eat more without necessarily gaining as much bad weight on your body like fat or these sorts of things. So those are some quick reasons why you might want to build muscle. And before I get into this video, I'm just going to preface by stating that to actually build muscle, it's a long-term process, and actually you need a lot of things, but the main things you need are water, like sufficient hydration. You need good energy, so whether that is being in a calorie surplus or whether that's actually going to come from fat cells and glycogen stores when you're in a calorie deficit, it doesn't matter, but you need energy to build muscle. The last thing you need is adequate protein, and then I'm just going to add in there, you also need sufficient rest and recovery in order to be able to build the muscle as well. So those are some quick things you need to know just before we get into the meat of the video, which is 3 ways that you can build muscle more effectively. Okay, so the first way is progressive overload, and I'm going to explain these terms as well if you don't know what that means. So progressive overload just means we need to overload, we need to get stronger in some way. So the most common way that people do that is they add weight onto the bar, or they add weight onto the machine or whatever they're using. They increase the difficulty by increasing the weight. You could increase the number of reps, but other things you could do, you could also increase the range of motion. Again, that's a bit harder to do, but it can be done on some exercises like deadlift. You could potentially add plates so you stand a bit taller. You could do other things as well for other exercises. So there's all sorts of things you could do there, but really the main thing is that people focus on increasing weight and increasing reps, but you could also increase the intensity. You could also increase the time between the sets. You could also increase the time that you do the sets in, but one way you could also increase the progressively overload is to actually decrease the rest time between sets. So that means it's going to be harder, and that's another way of increasing the intensity. So you might not have known that way. So that's the first way of building more muscle, is to progressively overload. So the next way of building muscle, the second way, is eccentric overload. So eccentric might sound like a term that you don't know what it means, but essentially there's 3 terms we use in terms of defining an exercise: isometric, concentric, and eccentric. So isometric is when the muscle actually doesn't change length. So muscles contract and they relax, so they get longer and they get shorter, but they can also apply force when they are not moving. So for example, if you're pushing against a wall, even though it's not moving and your muscles aren't getting longer or getting shorter, you're actually applying a force. So that's an isometric. Or if you were to hold a weight, maybe if you're carrying your shopping bags home, that's another isometric. Your muscles aren't getting longer or shorter, but they're involved in that stability component, so that's an isometric. So normally when you train in the gym, if you think about traditional exercises like squats, bicep curls, bench press, anything, there's 2 main phases of it. There's the concentric phase where the muscle actually contracts. So in the squat, that's when you actually stand up with the weight. With the bench press, that's when you push it up. With the bicep curl, that's when you actually curl the weight up. Okay, but there's another phase to that, and that's the eccentric component, and that's where you lower the weight. So in the bicep curl, that's where you actually drop the weight down. In the squat, that's when you squat down. In the bench press, that's actually where you lower the weight to your chest. So actually the majority of muscle and the majority of muscle damage, which will therefore stimulate the muscle protein synthesis for the muscle to grow bigger, actually the majority of that occurs in the eccentric portion. So the part where you're lowering the muscle, because that's actually where the muscle's getting longer. If you think about the muscle as like a rubber band, we always taught that analogy in school. The muscle's like a rubber band. It contracts and it recoils and it relaxes, and you can stretch it. So actually, a rubber band isn't actually really going to tear if when it recoils. It's more likely to tear a little bit when you stretch it. And again, we don't want to tear the muscles off their insertions. We just want to induce little micro tears for the muscle to get stronger and bigger. So actually, that portion of the movement, the eccentric portion, when things are going down, that's actually where the majority of the muscle damage is done. So you really want to focus on that bit. That's a point that a lot of people forget about. They just kind of drop the weight lazily, but no, you want to focus on that. So you could just spend more time in this position. So one thing that's really common is people say, so curl the weight up in like 1 second and let it down in 2. So spend twice as long on the eccentric as the concentric. That's a good way of doing it. Another thing you could do is actually you're stronger in the eccentric portion than the concentric portion. So potentially if no one was around in the gym, you should never really curl in the squat rack. But if you did go to the squat rack, what you could then do is you could actually load the bar higher, and then you could put more plates on the bar, and then you could just do the eccentric portion of the curl. So that's one way that you can actually overload the eccentric portion. And again, just remember, not all of these apply to every exercise. You know, it's very difficult to eccentrically overload the squat or the bench press, because once you've gone down and there's more weight than you can handle going up, then how are you going to get up unless you've got lots of friendly helpers to help you? But that might be a bit difficult in COVID. So again, it doesn't apply to every exercise, but it's a great way you could easily overload your arms, or potentially if you were talking about legs, actually instead you could do something like the Bulgarian split squat and hold heavier dumbbells at the top, and then actually when you get to the bottom you could just let them go and then come up nicely. So you could do it to every muscle, but it doesn't necessarily apply to every exercise. You don't want to necessarily be doing that with heavy things like the bench press or the squat, where, like I mentioned before, it's a bit harder to do that. Okay, so that's the second way that you can build muscle more effectively, is the eccentric overload. So the last way that you can build muscle more effectively is you can do something that's called metabolic overload. And how you do that is essentially you do lots of reps in a short amount of time. So what you could do, think of this as like gaining the pump or something. You really just want to push the muscle to failure and potentially even through failure. So one way that's really good of doing that is doing a partial range of motion. And so for example, like a bicep curl, just focusing at the top or the bottom and just really rep it and keep going until the muscle's really burning, and then try and push through that, because it's that accumulation of lactic acid, that accumulation of anaerobic metabolites, or things that are created without sufficient oxygen, that really damages the muscle more in order to stimulate further growth. And actually the other thing that does is it increases your work capacity, so that's going to make sure that you're able to do more workouts and work out for longer, which is going to mean that you're stronger in the long term as well. So those are 3 ways that you could do that, and in another video maybe I'll go through better examples in a quick way, so just pick a muscle and go through them. You don't have to do these on every single exercise, so you don't have to do a squat that incorporates progressive overload, eccentric overload, and then metabolic overload as well. But perhaps for every muscle group you want to pick one exercise that's going to focus on those things. So for example, let's say you're doing biceps, perhaps a good way of doing it would be for your biceps you pick the progressive overload as the bicep curl, so just add weight or add reps to that, and then for the eccentric overload maybe do a heavier cheek curl, or potentially even do something like the lying incline curl, where you get a nice big stretch at the bottom and you can really focus on that eccentric component. And then for the metabolic overload you could do something like the spider curl, or again just a standing curl, and just focus on the partial, and then you can really rep that out, and then you could acquire the metabolic overload. So in that sense you kind of only pick 3 exercises, but you've covered all the bases for that muscle. So like I said, those are 3 ways that you could increase your muscle protein synthesis and increase your rate of muscle building in a very effective way, just kind of maximizing the muscle building. And like I said before, you just want to make sure that you're doing all the other things. You're getting sufficient hydration, sufficient rest, sufficient energy for your exercise needs. So there you go guys, a bit of different content for you guys, but I think there's a lot of fitness content out there, and it's difficult to get into it because there's so many people who are so professional, but there's also a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of different things people tout. They reference different literature here and again, and literature's constantly changing, so again it can be very confusing when you're first starting. So that's why I thought I would just bring some very simple some maybe difficult concepts, or some evidenced concepts that perhaps people don't know about, and then just really explain them so simply that anybody could understand. That's really the aim of these videos, just so everybody can improve their health and well-being, really. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Take care, peace out, follow for more content, subscribe, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, that really helps. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and peace out.